Hello, my name is Dr. Margaret Harper, and I'm looking forward to introducing you to the basics of French classic organ music. This series of videos is designed to work together to introduce you to the major genres and stylistic elements of French classic organ music. Each episode focuses on one composer and is generally graded in difficulty. This first video, intended as an introduction for beginners, uses the music of François Couperin. Later episodes focus on the music of Pierre Dumage and Nicolas de Cligny. I am delighted to be able to demonstrate this music for you on an organ inspired by and built in the style of a French classic organ by Jean Bedient. There is tremendous benefit to studying music on the sort of instrument that originally inspired its composition. After all, a truly excellent organ is often the best teacher of all. François Couperin lived from 1668 through 1733, precisely in the middle of the nearly 2-century-long period that we now call the French classic era. François came from a family that boasted many highly regarded musicians across more than 2 centuries of music history. He's sometimes referred to as Couperin le Grand because of the enduring importance of his musical legacy. François' father, Charles, died when François was only 10 years old. After this, François was taken under the wing of Jacques Tommelin, who was the organist to the king. François was also promised that on his 18th birthday, he would inherit his father's position as organist at Saint-Gervais Church in Paris. The organist position at Saint-Gervais was held by members of the Couperin family for an astounding total of 174 years. As promised, when François turned 18, he took up the post of organist at Saint-Gervais. A few years later, at the age of 21, he married Marie-Anne Anceau, whose family provided François with valuable business connections that enabled the young composer significant access to rights to publish his music. François had everything he needed to be set up for a successful life as a Parisian musician: a prominent church organist job, powerful connections for financing and networking, and the strength of a well-known family name. By the age of 25, François was selected by King Louis XIV to succeed his former teacher Jacques Tommelin as organist to the king. Other honors followed swiftly: a family coat of arms and being appointed Chevalier de l'Ordre de l'Étoile. All told, Couperin le Grand received an extraordinary number of honors and privileges for an organist in his or any era. His pièce d'orgue is comprised of 2 mass settings, one for parish churches and the other for convents. Generally speaking, the Mass for parishes is intended for important feast days, makes more frequent use of pedals, and is somewhat more challenging. The Mass for the convents is slightly easier, makes less frequent use of pedals, and was intended for a more humble setting. The structure of the Mass for convents is quite typical for what we might expect of a French classic organ Mass. At this time in France, the Catholic Church was the church of the state, and Gregorian chant was the bedrock on which all sacred music was constructed. Organists were expected to play in alternation with the choir, exchanging back and forth verses of chant. Of course, the organ cannot sing texts, but it can provide variety through colorful registration changes and contrasting textures. Sometimes organ versets directly quoted the melody of chant, and sometimes they contained only freely composed material in the same mode or key as the chant. Throughout the course of a liturgy, there would have been many moments where the choir and the organ performed chant in alternatum. Within the context of alternatum versets, there was a standard structure that organ verses followed. This structure is remarkably consistent through much of the French classic era. Let's take the Gloria from Couperin's Mass for the Convents as an example. The Gloria is one of the 5 so-called ordinaries of the Mass, which means that it's one of 5 parts of the Mass that are identical no matter what part of the church year you're in. The first organ verset of the Gloria in the Mass for the Convents indicates it is to be played on the plein jeu. French classic organs were built around 2 choruses, the plein jeu, the principal chorus, and the grand jeu, the reed chorus. Depending on the size of an organ, typically 2 manual divisions would have both a plein jeu and a grand jeu. The organ we will use for these episodes has 4 keyboards. From bottom to top, they are positif, grand orgue, récit, and echo. Of these, the lower 2 keyboards have a greater variety of stops. The positif, played from the first keyboard, is located at the player's back. The grand orgue is the largest division and speaks directly into the room over the player's head. The récit has only a treble compass and is primarily used for its colorful cornet stop, which is a compound stop. This means that for each key you might play, multiple pipes sound. The 4th keyboard, the echo, sounds more distant and is designed to do exactly what its name suggests, create musical echoes. The plein jeu is the standard registration that opens the vast majority of French classic organ suites. A plein jeu is a principal chorus, including the mixtures, with the additional foundation support of the 8-foot bourdon. The petit plein jeu is the principal chorus on the positif, and this is coupled into the principal chorus on the grand orgue to make the grand plein jeu. Note that French classic organs typically have only 1 manual coupler, which is between the positif and the grand orgue. This is a shove coupler. Notice that the style of playing for the plein jeu is generally smooth and is mostly free from ornaments. Plein jeu versets tend to be focused on harmony rather than having a clear and prominent melody in the top voice. Indeed, the plein jeu is an excellent venue for a composer to take unexpected and memorable harmonic turns. For example, listen to what Couperin does by adding an F natural and a G sharp in quick succession in his plein jeu. The end of Couperin's plein jeu calls for large intervals, including 2 places where the left hand must play tenths. It's important to know that French classic keyboards were made to different dimensions than modern keyboards typically are. Keys were slightly less wide, which made large intervals much easier to play. However, even with this advantage, my small hands need some help. I can only reach a 9th, and French classic music frequently requires a span of a 10th. For this plein jeu, I have coupled the manuals down to the pedals and will play the lower notes of large intervals with my feet. Note that the French classic pedal board looks quite different from a modern AGO standard pedal board. We will talk more about this in the 3rd episode of this series. The inner versets of a suite in the French classic era usually feature a variety of contrasting, colorful sounds. Today, we will look at just a couple of these. First, let's look at Couperin's duo sur le tierce. The duo sur le tierce is written for the jeu de tierce. Jeu, a word we have already encountered in the context of the terms plein jeu and grand jeu, refers to a combination of stops which is typically named for its most dominant or most colorful component part. The most important stop in the jeu de tierce is the tierce. This adds a highly distinctive color to the sound of the organ. The tierce is not played on its own, but rather in combination with other supporting stops. These are typically the bourdon 8, prestant 4, nasade, doublette, and occasionally a lerigot. The compositional style of a duo is playful, with many ornaments, dotted rhythms, and fast scales. Common compositional devices are sequences, that is, motives that are repeated multiple times, changing pitch level each time, and sudden flourishes. Listen, for instance, to measures 29 through 37 from Couperin's Duo sur le tierce. In the Dialogue sur les voix humaines, we find a more delicate, expressive piece of music. The voix humaine is a gentle reed stop that, as you might have guessed from its name, is designed to imitate the human voice. It's always paired with a bourdon 8 and either the flute 4 or prestant 4 for support. Reeds can be temperamental and are prone to delayed speech if they get dusty or dirty. Pairing a reed with supporting flute or principal stops can help to provide more predictable speech. Because of the amount of ornamentation expected in the French classic era, reliable speech is very important. The gentle voice of the voix humaine is accompanied by jeu doux, which means soft stops, and can be made up of a combination of delicate 8 and 4-foot stops, depending on the volume and character of the solo voice. In this case, I will use the 8 and 4-foot flutes on the positif for the jeu doux. Listen now to how seamlessly the gentle voix humaine builds on the jeu doux to create a plaintive melody. Listen also to the way the voix humaine's speech is aided by the 8 and 4-foot flutes it's paired with. In French classic alternatim verses, it's typical to end any set with a dialogue sur le grand jeu. These are rousing, riotous verses which feature the choruses of reed stops from different manuals, both in alternation with one another and played together. No French classic organ is complete without colorful and dramatic reeds, and this registration uses them to great effect. that the opening plein jeu and the closing dialogue sur le grand jeu serve as bookends for French classic organ suites. Between these exist a myriad of options for colorful, contrasting sounds. In the remaining 2 videos of this series, we will explore even more of the colorful resources of the French classic organ, which are exploited to their fullest in the works of Pierre Dumas and Nicolas de Grigny. I hope you have enjoyed this introduction to the music of François Couperin, and I hope you will continue on to our next 2 episodes. I also encourage you to begin reading about French classic organ music. 2 books that are a fantastic introduction to this style are The Language of the Classical French Organ by Fenner Douglas and Organ and Interpretation, The French École Classique by Paolo Crivellaro. The music of the French Baroque is astoundingly rich in color, expression, and creativity. It is immensely engaging music to play and to hear.